The woman's body lay crumpled in the snow like a discarded doll. Her dark hair matted with blood that had frozen into crystalline patterns across her bruised face. And if Kieran Novak hadn't been riding the fence line that bitter February morning in 1879, she would have been dead within the hour. His horse sensed her first, ears pricking forward and nostrils flaring at the scent of blood on the wind. Kieran pulled his coat tighter against the brutal South Dakota cold, squinting through the snow that had started falling again just after dawn. The temperature had dropped so low the previous night that he'd heard trees splitting in the forest, their sap freezing and expanding until the wood could no longer contain it. No one should be out in this weather, yet there in the pristine whiteness was a dark shape that didn't belong. He urged his mare forward, his heart beginning to pound as the shape resolved itself into a woman lying face down in a drift. Kieran was off his horse before he fully registered dismounting, his knees hitting the snow as he reached for her with shaking hands that had nothing to do with the cold. When he turned her over as gently as he could manage, he sucked in a sharp breath. Her face was a ruin of purple and black bruises, one eye swollen completely shut, her lips split in two places. Blood had dried beneath her nose and at the corner of her mouth. Her dress was torn, inadequate for the weather, and when he pressed his fingers to her throat, searching desperately for a pulse, her skin was like ice beneath his touch. For a terrible moment, he thought he was too late. Then he felt it, so faint he almost missed it, the flutter of life beneath her frozen skin. She was alive, but barely, and every second she remained in the snow brought her closer to death. Kieran didn't hesitate. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body limp and unresponsive. He managed to get her draped across his saddle, then swung up behind her, cradling her against his chest as he turned his horse toward home. His ranch was 3 miles away, and he pushed his mare harder than he ever had before, praying the animal wouldn't slip on the ice, praying the woman in his arms would hold on just a little longer. The ride seemed to take forever, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. By the time his cabin came into view, Kieran's arms were burning from holding her steady, and he'd lost feeling in his fingers. He half fell from his horse, still clutching the woman, and kicked open his front door with enough force to send it crashing against the inside wall. The warmth of the cabin hit him like a physical thing. He'd left the fire burning when he went out that morning, and it was still going strong. He carried her straight to his bed, the only bed in the small cabin, and laid her down on the quilts his mother had made before she passed. Then he ran back outside to quickly stable his horse, giving her extra oats as an apology for the hard ride, before rushing back to the woman who might be dying in his bed. Her lips were blue, her breathing so shallow he had to put his cheek near her mouth to feel it. Kieran knew about cold, about what it did to a body when it sank its teeth in deep. He'd lost a friend to exposure 5 years back, had watched helplessly as the man's body simply gave up despite all their efforts to warm him. He wouldn't let that happen to this woman. He couldn't. He worked quickly, stripping away her wet, frozen clothing with hands that tried their best to be respectful even in the urgency of the moment. Her body was covered in bruises, old and new, yellow and purple and black marks that spoke of systematic cruelty. Rage flared hot in his chest, but he pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help her now. When she was bare, he wrapped her in every blanket he owned, piling them high, then set about warming rocks in the fire. He placed them around her body, careful not to let them touch her skin directly, building a nest of warmth. He made hot tea strong and sweet, and though she couldn't drink it herself, he managed to get small amounts past her lips, supporting her head and praying she would swallow. Hours passed. Kieran never left her side except to tend the fire or warm more rocks. He bathed her face with warm water, cleaning away the dried blood as gently as he could. Beneath the bruises, he could see she was young, probably no more than 22 or 23. She had a straight nose and high cheekbones, dark lashes that lay like crescents against her battered cheeks. Night fell, and still she didn't wake. Kieran pulled a chair close to the bed and kept his vigil, listening to her breathe, watching the almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. He found himself talking to her, his voice low and steady in the quiet cabin. "You're going to be all right," he told her. "I don't know who did this to you, or why they left you out there to die, but you're safe now. You're going to live. You have to live." Sometime near midnight, her breathing changed. It deepened, became more regular, and when he touched her forehead, her skin felt warmer. Not feverish, just less like touching death. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that he had to put his head in his hands for a moment, his shoulders shaking. He must have dozed off in the chair because he jerked awake to find pale dawn light filtering through the cabin's single window. The fire had burned low, and he quickly added more wood, then turned back to check on his patient. Her eyes were open. The one that wasn't swollen shut, at least, was staring at him with an expression of such terror that he immediately backed away, raising his hands. "It's all right," he said quickly. "You're safe. I found you in the snow yesterday morning. I brought you here." She tried to speak, but only a croak came out. Her good eye darted around the cabin, taking in the rough-hewn walls, the simple furniture, the door. Kieran could see her calculating, trying to figure out if she had the strength to run. "My name is Kieran Novak," he said, keeping his voice gentle, the way he would with a frightened horse. "This is my ranch about 6 miles south of Sioux Falls. You were nearly frozen to death when I found you. You've been unconscious for almost a full day." She swallowed hard, wincing at the pain it caused. "Water," she managed to whisper. He brought her water immediately, supporting her head while she drank. She was so weak she could barely lift her hand, and he saw tears of frustration leak from her good eye. When she'd drunk her fill, he settled her back against the pillows. "What's your name?" he asked. She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice like broken glass, she said, "Rose. Rose Ashford." "Rose," he repeated, and something about the way he said it, with such gentleness and respect, made more tears spill down her bruised cheeks. "Can you tell me what happened to you?" Her whole body went rigid, and he saw fresh terror flash across her face. "He'll find me," she whispered. "He'll come for me." "Who?" Kieran asked, his jaw tightening. "Who did this to you, my husband?" The word came out like poison. "Thomas Ashford. I tried to leave him. He caught me at the station in town. He dragged me out into the snow and he—" Her voice broke. "He said if I wanted to leave so badly, I could freeze to death out there. That way no one could say he killed me." Kieran felt rage building in him again, hotter than before. What kind of man did that to a woman? What kind of monster beat his wife and left her to die in the snow like she was nothing? "You'll live with me," he said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. "Here on the ranch, you'll be safe. I won't let him touch you again." Rose stared at him with her one good eye, and he saw something that might have been hope flicker there, though it was quickly tamped down. "You don't know him," she said. "Thomas is a powerful man in Sioux Falls. He owns half the businesses in town. People do what he says." "I don't," Kieran said flatly, "and this is my land. He's not welcome here." "Why?" Rose asked, and there was such bewilderment in her voice that it hurt his heart. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Kieran thought about that. He thought about finding her in the snow, about that terrible moment when he thought she was already dead, about the relief he'd felt when she finally started to improve. He thought about how, even battered and bruised, There was something about her that called to something in him. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because no one deserves what was done to you. Now rest. You need to heal." Over the following days, a routine established itself. Kieran tended to Rose with a care and gentleness that surprised them both. He made her soup from the beef he'd smoked in the fall, rich and nourishing. He changed the dressings on her cuts, his touch always careful, always respectful. He helped her sit up when she was strong enough, helped her take a few shaky steps around the cabin when she insisted she needed to move. He slept on the floor near the fire, wrapped in his coat, refusing to take back his bed while she was still recovering. Rose protested at first, but Kieran was immovable on this point. She needed the bed more than he did. As the bruises on her face began to fade from black to purple to yellow-green, Rose grew stronger. She started staying awake for longer periods, and they began to talk. At first, the conversations were simple, surface-level things. Kieran told her about his ranch, about the cattle and horses he raised, about how he'd come to South Dakota 5 years ago with nothing but a dream and a stubborn refusal to give up. Rose told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about how her parents had died when she was 19, about how Thomas had seemed kind at first, charming even. "He didn't show his true nature until after we were married," she said one evening, staring into the fire. Kieran had moved a second chair near the hearth, and they sat together as the wind howled outside. By then, it was too late. A woman can't just leave her husband. People don't understand. They think if a man hits his wife, she must have done something to deserve it. "That's never true," Kieran said firmly. "A man who raises his hand to a woman isn't a man at all." Rose looked at him then, really looked at him, and Kieran felt something shift between them. He'd known she was beautiful despite the bruises, but now, with her face healing and her eyes clear, he found himself noticing other things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The small smile she gave when he said something that amused her. The strength in her that had kept her alive through things that would have broken someone weaker. He realized with a start, beginning to care for her as more than just someone who needed his help. The thought should have frightened him, but instead it felt right in a way few things in his life ever had. Rose must have seen something in his expression, because she looked away quickly, a flush rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. "Tell me more about the ranch," she said, changing the subject. "What do you do when winter breaks?" So he told her about the spring roundup, about the joy of seeing new calves wobbling on unsteady legs, about the satisfaction of watching his herd grow. He told her about the river that ran through his property, about how in summer it was the prettiest place he'd ever seen. He painted pictures with his words, and Rose listened with an attention that made him want to keep talking forever. 2 weeks after he'd found her, Rose was strong enough to help around the cabin. She insisted on it, despite Kieran's protests that she should rest longer. "I need to do something," she said. "I need to feel useful, please." So he let her help with the cooking, with the mending, with the 100 small tasks that kept a household running. They worked together in a comfortable silence that felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed each other in the small space, and Kieran would feel a jolt of something electric run through him. He thought Rose felt it too, from the way she would pause and look at him when it happened, her eyes wide and wondering. It was 3 weeks to the day when they heard the horses approaching. Kieran was outside chopping wood, and Rose was inside preparing stew for supper. The sound of multiple riders made him set down his axe and move toward the cabin, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept by the door. 5 men rode into his yard, and at their head was a man in an expensive coat and a black hat. Thomas Ashford. Kieran knew it before the man even opened his mouth. There was cruelty in the set of his jaw, in the cold calculation in his eyes. "That's far enough," Kieran called out, raising his rifle. "State your business." Thomas smiled, but it was the smile of a snake. "I'm looking for my wife," he said, his voice cultured and smooth. "I have reason to believe she might be here. Rose, darling, are you in there?" Inside the cabin, Kieran knew Rose would have heard. He hoped she would stay hidden, stay safe. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "There's no one here but me." "Now, that's interesting," Thomas said, dismounting slowly. His men followed suit, fanning out slightly. "Because I have a witness who saw you ride through town 3 weeks ago with a woman wrapped in your coat. A woman who looked an awful lot like my Rose." "Even if I had found a woman half frozen to death," Kieran said carefully, "what makes you think I'd hand her over to the man who put her in that condition?" Thomas's expression darkened. "My wife is my property, Mr. Novak. What I do with my property is my business, not yours." "The law agrees with me." "The law's not here right now," Kieran said, "and I'm telling you to get off my land." "Or what?" Thomas asked, his hand moving toward his gun. "You'll shoot me. My men will gun you down before your body hits the ground, and then I'll take my wife home anyway." The door to the cabin opened. Rose stood there, wrapped in one of Kieran's shirts over her dress, her hair pulled back. The bruises on her face had faded but were still visible, and Kieran saw Thomas's men shift uncomfortably at the sight of what their employer had done. "Don't hurt him," Rose said, her voice steady despite the fear Kieran could see in her eyes. "This isn't his fight, Thomas. It's between you and me." "Rose, get back inside," Kieran said urgently. "No," she said, stepping fully outside. "I won't let you die for me." Thomas laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "How touching. You've been here 3 weeks and you've already got him willing to die for you. Tell me, Rose, have you been playing the whore for your savior? Is that how you've been repaying his kindness?" Kieran moved before he could think, his fist connecting with Thomas's jaw hard enough to send the man staggering back. Thomas's men all drew their guns, and Kieran found himself staring down 5 barrels, knowing he'd just made a fatal mistake. "Stop," Rose cried. "Please just stop." "Thomas, I'll come with you. I'll come willingly if you promise not to hurt Kieran." "Rose, no," Kieran said, but she wasn't looking at him. Thomas rubbed his jaw, his eyes murderous. "You're coming with me either way," he said to Rose. "But I think I'll kill him anyway, just to teach you a lesson about running." One of Thomas's men cleared his throat. "Boss, I don't think that's a good idea. Killing a man in cold blood, especially on his own property, that's murder. Sheriff won't look the other way on that, no matter how much money you have." Thomas rounded on his man. "I pay you to do what I say, not to think." "You pay us to work for you, not to hang for you," the man said. "And that's what'll happen if we do this. We all saw what you did to Mrs. Ashford. We all know why she ran. I'm done being part of this." The man holstered his gun and turned his horse around. After a moment's hesitation, 2 of the other men did the same. Thomas was left with only 2 riders, and the calculation in his eyes told Kieran he was weighing his options. "This isn't over," Thomas said finally, pointing at Kieran. "You've made an enemy today. And you," he turned to Rose, "you're still my wife. When I come back, and I will come back, you're coming with me." He mounted his horse and rode off with his remaining men, leaving Kieran and Rose standing in the yard. As soon as they were out of sight, Rose's knees buckled. Kieran caught her before she fell, holding her as she shook. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "You're all right. He's gone." "He'll be back," Rose said, her voice muffled against his chest. "He meant what he said. He'll come back, and next time he'll bring more men who will do what he wants." Kieran pulled back enough to look at her face. Then we'll be ready. Rose, I meant what I said. You'll live with me. I'll keep you safe. Why? She asked again, the same question she'd asked that first day. Why are you doing this for me? This time, Kieran had an answer. Because when I found you in that snow, something in me changed. These past 3 weeks, getting to know you, watching you heal and grow strong again, I've felt more alive than I have in years. I care about you, Rose. More than I probably should given the circumstances, but I can't help it. Rose's eyes filled with tears. Kieran, I'm still married to him. Even if I wanted to be with you, and God help me, I think I do, the law says I belong to Thomas. Then we'll find a way to change that, Kieran said. There has to be something we can do. A divorce, maybe. On what grounds? Rose asked bitterly. Cruelty isn't enough. I'd need to prove adultery, and Thomas is too careful for that. Or abandonment, but he's made it clear he'll never let me go. They stood there in the cold yard, holding each other, both of them trying to figure out a solution to a problem that seemed insurmountable. Finally, Kieran led her back inside, settling her by the fire while he thought. What if you weren't Rose Ashford anymore? He said slowly. What if you were someone else entirely? Rose looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? Rose Ashford was left in the snow to die, Kieran said, his mind working through the idea as he spoke. Everyone knows Thomas took you out into the storm. What if Rose Ashford never came back? What if she really did die out there and you're someone new now? You want me to fake my death? Rose asked. Not fake it exactly, Kieran said. More like let people believe what they already think happened. Thomas left you to die. As far as anyone knows, you did die. We just don't correct them. But someone saw you bring me into town, Rose pointed out. Wrapped in my coat, barely visible, Kieran said. They saw a woman. They don't know for certain it was you, and if questioned, I'll say I found a woman in the snow, tried to save her, but she died anyway. I buried her on my property. That's an incredible risk, Rose said. If anyone found out, you could be charged with helping me evade my marriage. That's illegal. I don't care, Kieran said fiercely. Rose, I won't hand you over to a man who tried to murder you. I won't. We'll make this work somehow. Rose was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. I'd need a new name, a new identity. What name do you want? Kieran asked. She thought about it. My mother's name was Rebecca, she said. Rebecca Ann. I always loved that name. Rebecca Ann, Kieran repeated. That's beautiful. But you'll need a last name too. Rose looked at him, and there was something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression. Could I use yours? She asked. Could I be Rebecca Ann Novak? People might assume I'm your sister or a cousin, or my wife, Kieran said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Rose's breath caught. Kieran, we've only known each other 3 weeks. I know, he said. And I'm not saying we should rush into anything. But Rose, Rebecca, whatever name you choose, I want you to know that my offer isn't just about keeping you safe. These weeks with you have been the best of my life. When I think about my future, I see you in it. I see us building a life together. If that's something you might want too someday, then I'll wait as long as you need. Rose stood up, crossing the small distance between them. She took his face in her hands, her touch gentle. I never thought I'd want to be close to a man again after Thomas, she said. I thought he'd destroyed that part of me, but when you touch me, I don't feel fear. I feel safe. I feel cherished. And yes, I think I could love you, Kieran Novak. I think maybe I already do. He kissed her then, soft and careful, mindful of her healing lip. It was nothing like the brutal kisses Thomas had forced on her. This was gentle, reverent, full of promise. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. Over the next few months, as winter slowly released its grip on South Dakota and spring began to green the prairie, Rose Ashford ceased to exist, and Rebecca Ann was born. Kieran made a trip into Sioux Falls, spreading the story that the woman he'd found had died despite his best efforts. He'd even prepared a grave marker, placed in the corner of his property near a stand of cottonwood trees, with the name Rose Ashford carved into it. Thomas came by the ranch once more, demanding to see his wife's body. Kieran had taken him to the grave, watched the man's face as he stared at the marker. There had been no grief there, only anger that his property had been taken from him. When Thomas demanded to dig up the grave, Kieran had refused, and Thomas hadn't pushed it. Perhaps he'd realized that if he forced the issue and found no body, he'd have to explain why he'd been so certain his wife was there in the first place. After that visit, Thomas left them alone. Kieran heard through town gossip that Thomas had told everyone his poor wife had run away in the middle of the night, disoriented and disturbed, and had frozen to death before he could find her. He played the grieving widower, and people believed him because they wanted to. It was easier than believing one of the town's most prominent citizens was a murderer. As spring bloomed into summer, Rebecca and Kieran's relationship deepened. They worked the ranch together, rounding up cattle, mending fences, planting a vegetable garden. Rebecca proved to have a gift with horses, gentling even the most skittish animals with patience and soft words. Kieran loved watching her work, loved the way she'd push her hair back and leave a smudge of dirt on her cheek, loved the smile she gave him when she caught him staring. They talked about everything. Rebecca told him about her childhood, about the parents she'd lost, about the dreams she'd had before Thomas had crushed them one by one. Kieran told her about his own past, about growing up poor in Kansas, about losing his parents to cholera, about coming west with nothing but hope and determination. They talked about the future too. About expanding the ranch, maybe buying the neighboring property that was up for sale. About building a bigger house with multiple rooms and a proper kitchen. About children someday when the time was right. It was late August when Kieran proposed properly. He'd been planning it for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. It came on an evening when they'd ridden out to check the northern pasture. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, and Rebecca was standing at the edge of the river, watching the water flow by. Kieran came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him with a contentment that made his heart swell. "Rebecca," he said softly. She turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held all the trust in the world. "I know your past makes marriage a complicated thing," he said. "I know you've got every reason to be wary of it, but I love you. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Kieran, I'll marry you." He'd bought a ring weeks ago, a simple gold band with a small ruby, and he slipped it onto her finger now. It fit perfectly. They kissed as the sun set over the prairie, and Kieran thought he'd never been happier in his entire life. The wedding was a quiet affair. They rode to a small town 2 days away, a place where no one knew them, and found a preacher who was willing to marry them without asking too many questions. Kieran gave his real name, and Rebecca gave hers, Rebecca Ann Novak, soon to be twice over. They exchanged vows in a simple ceremony, signed the marriage certificate, and rode home as husband and wife. That night, in the bed they now shared openly, Rebecca let Kieran love her fully for the first time. He was gentle and patient, mindful of her past trauma, letting her set the pace. When she cried afterward, he held her close, murmuring reassurances, until she explained that these were tears of joy, of relief, of finally understanding what it was supposed to be like between a man and a woman. "I never knew it could be beautiful," she whispered against his chest. "Thomas only ever took, You give. Always, Kieran promised, kissing her forehead. I'll always give you everything I have. Their first year of marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Kieran's herd grew, and Rebecca started breeding horses, discovering she had a real talent for it. They made trips to town together now, Rebecca wearing her hair differently and dressing in styles Rose Ashford had never worn. Once, they passed Thomas on the street, and the man's eyes slid right over Rebecca without a flicker of recognition. She'd changed that much, both outside and in. It was the following spring when Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She'd been feeling ill in the mornings, and when her monthly courses didn't come, she began to suspect. She waited to tell Kieran until she was certain, then surprised him one evening after supper. "I have some news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Kieran's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, understanding, and then pure joy. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rebecca bloomed, her face glowing with health and happiness. Kieran was attentive to the point of being overprotective, always worried she was working too hard or lifting too much. Rebecca found it endearing, even when it drove her a little crazy. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she'd tell him, but she'd be smiling when she said it. As her belly grew round with their child, they prepared the cabin for the new arrival. Kieran built a cradle from oak, sanding it smooth and carving little horses into the headboard. Rebecca sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her heart full of anticipation and a little fear. What if she wasn't a good mother? What if her experiences with Thomas had broken something in her that couldn't be fixed? Kieran sensed her worries and addressed them head-on. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he told her one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "I see how you are with the animals, how patient and loving you are. Our child is going to be so lucky to have you." "To have us," Rebecca corrected, taking his hand. "This baby is going to have the father I always wished I'd had, someone kind and strong and good." The baby came on a cold November morning, almost 2 years to the day after Kieran had found Rebecca in the snow. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Kieran feared he might lose both Rebecca and the child. But Rebecca was strong, stronger than he'd ever fully appreciated, and when the baby finally arrived, letting out a lusty cry that filled the cabin, Kieran felt his knees go weak with relief. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, a woman from a neighboring ranch who Rebecca had befriended. "A big, healthy boy." Rebecca held their son for the first time, tears streaming down her face. The baby had dark hair like his mother, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same deep brown as Kieran's. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked, looking up at Kieran with exhausted joy. They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Kieran knew. "James," he said, "after my father, James Novak." "James," Rebecca repeated, smiling down at the baby. "Hello, James, welcome to the world." Fatherhood changed Kieran in ways he hadn't expected. He'd always thought of himself as a man focused on work, on building something lasting. But nothing he'd ever accomplished compared to the overwhelming love he felt the first time James wrapped his tiny fist around Kieran's finger. He would do anything for this child, for this family. He would move mountains, fight armies, tear down the sky itself if it meant keeping them safe. As James grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. They hired help, a couple of ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse Kieran built, good men who worked hard and didn't ask questions about Rebecca's past. The horse breeding operation Rebecca had started became well known throughout the territory, with buyers coming from as far as Nebraska and Wyoming to purchase her stock. Life was good. Life was better than Kieran had ever dared to dream it could be. And yet, there was always a shadow lurking at the edges of their happiness. Thomas Ashford was still alive, still living in Sioux Falls, still believing his wife was dead. What would happen if he ever learned the truth? The question was answered on a spring day when James was 3 years old. Kieran and Rebecca had taken James into Sioux Falls for supplies, something they did rarely but occasionally had to do. They were at the general store, James holding Rebecca's hand and chattering about the candy he wanted, when Thomas walked in. Kieran saw him first and immediately moved to put himself between Thomas and Rebecca, but he wasn't fast enough. Thomas's eyes found Rebecca, widened in shock, then narrowed in recognition and rage. "Rose," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Rebecca froze. For a moment, she was transported back to that terrible time, back to being the woman who flinched at every raised voice. But then she felt James's hand in hers, felt Kieran's solid presence at her back, and she straightened her spine. "My name is Rebecca," she said clearly. "I'm Rebecca Novak." "I think you have me confused with someone else." Thomas crossed the store in quick strides, his face twisted with fury. "Don't play games with me. You're my wife. You're Rose Ashford, and you're supposed to be dead." "Your wife is dead," Kieran said, stepping forward. "She died 3 years ago, frozen in the snow. There's a grave on my property to prove it." "Then who is this?" Thomas demanded, gesturing at Rebecca. "This is my wife," Kieran said. "We've been married for over 2 years. We have a son together. You have no claim on her." "The hell I don't," Thomas snarled. "She's Rose. I'd know her anywhere. The eyes, the way she stands, everything about her is Rose." "You're mistaken," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "And even if I were this Rose you're looking for, which I'm not, your wife died. You left her in the snow to freeze. Everyone knows that story. If she somehow survived and started a new life, can you blame her?" "I'll have you arrested," Thomas said. "Both of you. For fraud, for bigamy, for whatever I can make stick. You'll lose everything." "No, Thomas, you'll lose everything." The new voice came from the doorway. They all turned to see a woman standing there, well-dressed, perhaps 40 years old. She was looking at Thomas with a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. "Margaret," Thomas said, his face going pale. "What are you doing here?" "Making sure you get what you deserve," Margaret said, walking into the store. She looked at Rebecca with kindness. "You must be Rose. Or Rebecca, as you call yourself now. I'm Margaret Sullivan. I was engaged to Thomas before he met you. He ended our engagement quite suddenly, and I never understood why until I started hearing the rumors about how he treated his wife." "This is none of your concern, Margaret," Thomas said. "Oh, but it is," Margaret said. "You see, I've spent the last 3 years gathering evidence about your activities, Thomas. The business deals you've conducted illegally, the money you've stolen from your investors, the properties you've acquired through fraud. I have documentation of everything. And I've given it all to the territorial marshal." As if summoned, a man wearing a marshal's badge walked into the store. He was tall and broad-shouldered with gray hair and hard eyes. "Thomas Ashford," he said, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder." "Attempted murder," Thomas said with a harsh laugh. "Who am I supposed to have tried to murder? Your wife," the marshal said. "Miss Sullivan has witness statements from 3 of your former employees, men who saw you take Rose Ashford out into a blizzard and leave her there to die. That's attempted murder, Mr. Ashford. And since you believed you'd succeeded and she's now legally married to someone else, I'd say you don't have any claim on her anymore anyway." Thomas looked around wildly, like a trapped animal. For a moment, Kieran thought he might try to run or fight. But then the fight seemed to go out of him all at once. The marshal clapped him in irons and led him away, leaving Rebecca, Kieran, and Margaret standing in the store. "Why did you help me?" Rebecca asked Margaret. "You don't even know me." "I know what Thomas is," Margaret said. "He was charming when we courted, but I saw glimpses of the cruelty underneath. When he ended our engagement to marry you instead, I was heartbroken at first. Then I heard how he treated you, and I felt guilty. If I'd spoken up about what I'd seen, maybe someone would have believed you when you tried to get help. Maybe you wouldn't have had to go through what you did. This was the least I could do." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and took Margaret's hand. "Thank you," she said. "You've given me back my life. You gave yourself back your life when you survived that snow," Margaret said gently. "I just helped tie up the loose ends." Thomas was tried and convicted on multiple charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison, and his assets were seized to repay his victims. Rebecca, finally and fully free of him, could breathe easier. She was no longer looking over her shoulder, no longer afraid that her past would catch up with her. Life on the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. James grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the horses as much as his mother did, and who followed his father around the ranch whenever he was allowed. When James was 5, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Emily Ann, after Rebecca's mother. 2 years later came another son, Michael, and 3 years after that, a second daughter, Sarah. The cabin was too small for their growing family, so Kieran built the house they'd always dreamed of. It was a real house, with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, a dining room where the whole family could gather. Rebecca planted roses around the porch, and in the summer their scent filled the air. They expanded the ranch too, buying the neighboring property and building their herd to be one of the largest in South Dakota. The horse breeding operation grew as well, with Rebecca training their children to work with the animals as they got older. James, in particular, showed a real talent for it. Years passed. The children grew. James fell in love with a girl from a nearby ranch and married her when he was 22. Emily followed suit a few years later. Michael and Sarah were still at home, still learning the ranch business, when Rebecca and Kieran celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They rode out to the river that evening, just the two of them, revisiting the place where Kieran had proposed all those years ago. The sun was setting in the same spectacular array of colors, and Rebecca stood in almost the same spot she had that long ago evening. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Rebecca asked, leaning back against Kieran. "If you'd ridden out even an hour later that morning, I would have died in that snow." "I think about it sometimes," Kieran admitted. "But then I remember that I did ride out when I did. I found you. And everything that's happened since has been the greatest gift of my life. Even the hard parts." Rebecca asked. "The fear, the running, the years of looking over our shoulders, even those," Kieran said, "because they brought us here. To this moment, to this life we've built together. Rebecca, you are the love of my life. Finding you was like finding the part of myself I didn't know was missing." Rebecca turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held 2 decades of love. "You saved me," she said. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to believe in goodness again. I love you, Kieran Novak. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." They kissed as the sun set, just like they had 20 years before, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. More years passed, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. They lost Michael to pneumonia when he was only 25, a grief that nearly broke them both but that they weathered together, holding each other through the darkest nights. Sarah married and moved to Montana with her husband, though she visited often. James and his wife gave them 6 grandchildren, and Emily provided 4 more. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, though Kieran and Rebecca still worked when they could, unable to fully give up the life they'd built together. They were in their 60s when Kieran's heart started to give him trouble. The doctor said he needed to slow down, take things easier, but Kieran was stubborn. "I've got years left in me yet," he insisted. "I'm not ready to sit in a rocking chair and watch life go by." "Then don't sit," Rebecca said practically. "But maybe stop trying to break horses like you're still 25. Let James and the grandchildren do the heavy work. We've earned the right to enjoy what we built." So they did slow down, though not as much as the doctor would have liked. They spent their days working in Rebecca's garden, taking gentle rides around the property, sitting on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set. They told stories to their grandchildren, passing down the history of the ranch and the family. But they never told the full truth about how they met. That story was too dangerous, even now. They simply said that Kieran had found Rebecca when she needed help, and they'd fallen in love. The children accepted this, never knowing the depths of tragedy their mother had survived or the miracle of her survival. It was a spring morning, much like the one when Kieran had found Rebecca all those years ago, when he woke to find her lying still beside him. For one terrible moment, he thought she'd passed in the night. Then he saw the gentle rise and fall of her chest and realized she was just deeply asleep. He lay there watching her, this woman who had been the center of his world for over 40 years. Her hair was white now, her face lined with the years, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he'd first seen her face beneath the bruises and blood. More beautiful, maybe, because now he knew every expression, every smile, every tear. Rebecca's eyes opened and she smiled at him. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Kieran replied. "I love you." "I love you too," Rebecca said, the same words she'd said countless times over the decades, never losing their meaning or weight. "Always and forever." "Always and forever," Kieran echoed. They were blessed with many more years together, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together more than 100 family members and friends. The ranch was a dynasty now, spanning thousands of acres, employing dozens of people, known throughout the West for the quality of its cattle and horses. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that they had each other. Through everything, through all the trials and triumphs, the joys and sorrows, they had faced it together. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that would echo through generations. Kieran passed first, his heart finally giving out one night as he slept. He was 83 years old, surrounded by family, and his last words were to Rebecca. "I'll wait for you." Rebecca lived another 2 years. She stayed on the ranch, unable to imagine being anywhere else, visiting Kieran's grave every day to tell him about the family, about the ranch, about all the little things he was missing. Her children worried about her, but she assured them she was fine. "I'm not ready to go yet," she told them. "There's still work to be done, still life to be lived. When it's time, I'll know." On a winter morning, 63 years after Kieran had found her dying in the snow, Rebecca Ann Novak passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 85 years old. They buried her next to Kieran under the cottonwood trees, not far from the marker that read Rose Ashford and represented the death of who she'd been and the birth of who she became. At her funeral, James spoke of his mother's strength, her kindness, her unwavering love for her family. He told stories that made people laugh and cry, painting a picture of a woman who had lived fully and loved deeply. He spoke of the partnership between his parents, the way they'd built something lasting not just in the ranch, but in the family they'd created. What he didn't know, what none of them knew except Rebecca and Kieran, was the full story of survival and salvation that had begun it all. But perhaps it didn't matter. What mattered was the legacy they'd left behind, a legacy of love and strength, of choosing life even when death would have been easier, of building something beautiful from the darkest of beginnings. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, each new generation adding their own chapter to the story while honoring what had come before. And sometimes, on quiet winter mornings when the snow fell soft and silent, people would see two figures walking hand in hand near the cottonwood trees, a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds and whose love had proven stronger than death itself. The story of Kieran and Rebecca became legend in the family, though the darkest parts were forgotten or smoothed over by time. What remained was the essential truth. That love, real love, the kind that weathers every storm and overcomes every obstacle, is worth fighting for. It's worth the risk, worth the fear, worth everything. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howls across the prairie and the snow falls thick and fast, if you listen carefully, you might hear the echo of hoofbeats, of a man riding hard through the storm, racing against time to save a woman he hasn't even met yet, but who will become his entire world. You might hear a voice strong and sure, cutting through the wind. "You'll live with me." And she did. She lived with him, loved with him, built a life with him that spanned decades and touched countless lives. From the darkest moment of her life came the greatest love, and from that love came a family, a legacy, a story that would be told for generations. That's the true Wild West story, not just of cowboys and cattle, of harsh landscapes and harder living, but of the human capacity for kindness, for love, for choosing to save a stranger and in doing so, saving yourself. It's the story of two people who found each other in the worst of circumstances and made something beautiful from it, something that lasted long after they were gone. The ranch still stands today, still run by descendants of Kieran and Rebecca, still breeding horses and raising cattle on the South Dakota prairie. The house Kieran built has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains, a testament to the love that built it. And under the cottonwood trees, two graves sit side by side, their markers simple but clear. Kieran Novak, beloved husband and father, and Rebecca Ann Novak, beloved wife and mother. Visitors to the ranch sometimes ask about the third marker, the one that reads Rose Ashford, and the family has a story they tell. They say it was a woman Kieran tried to save long ago, before he met Rebecca, a woman who died despite his efforts. They say he buried her on the property and marked her grave so she wouldn't be forgotten. It's close enough to the truth to satisfy curiosity without revealing the full story. But late at night, when the family gathers and the children are asleep, sometimes the elders will whisper the real story, passed down through carefully guarded telling. They'll talk about a woman who was beaten and left in the snow to die, about the cowboy who found her and said, "You'll live with me," about the love that grew from that moment of salvation. They tell it as a reminder of where they came from, of the strength it took to build what they have, of the power of choosing love even when hate seems to have won. And that story, that true story of Kieran and Rebecca, of Rose reborn, lives on. It lives in the land they worked, in the horses their descendants still breed with her techniques, in the values of strength and compassion they instilled in their children and their children's children. It lives in every sunset over the prairie, in every snowfall that blankets the ranch, in every act of kindness shown to a stranger in need. Because that's what love does. It endures. It transforms. It takes the broken pieces and makes them whole. It finds a woman dying in the snow and says, "You will live," and means it with everything. It builds a life, a family, a legacy that stretches across generations and touches infinity. Kieran and Rebecca Novak lived that love. They embodied it in every choice they made, every sacrifice they endured, every joy they celebrated. And their love story, beginning in tragedy and ending in triumph, stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of choosing to care for another person, especially when it's hard. That's the Wild West they lived in, not just a place of violence and struggle, but a place where a man could find a dying woman and decide, in that instant, that her life mattered more than his convenience. Where that woman could choose to trust again after every reason not to. Where two broken people could come together and make each other whole. Where love could bloom even in the coldest winter, even in the darkest circumstances, even when all hope seemed lost. And from that love, everything else followed, a cascade of good that rippled out across time, touching lives that would never know the full story but would benefit from it nonetheless. That's the legacy of Kieran and Rebecca Novak, the cowboy and the woman he saved, who saved each other, who built something lasting from a single moment of choice on a cold winter morning in 1879.